Hi and welcome to this video where I'm going to talk to you about the concept of a data spine in the event industry. So what is a data spine and why does it matter? In the event industry, very often event organizers will use multiple services to run their events in terms of data. So that'll be a registration provider who is maybe the source of truth for the personal data of each attendee, separate from an exhibitor or manager or exhibition management system that will take the details from each exhibitor, maybe even a separate sponsor management system, a speaker management system with sessions. So you're going to have data points about the people who attended the conference and what they did in multiple locations. So it's always been a very difficult thing to unite that data together under one roof so that you as an event organizer, if that's who you are, can actually run analytics on the data and really understand what happened at your event. So the big joke that you'll see people posting about on LinkedIn is that nobody really knows what's happening at their events. And that seems to be, for quite a large part of events, somewhat true. You know a section of what happened, but you can't cross-reference who actually scanned their badge and entered the event. It's difficult to cross-reference that with who actually showed up at the sessions without downloading the CSV from the registration provider and then downloading the CSV from the session management provider and doing clever Excel stuff to compare them, which is what most people do, and that works okay, but it's obviously not reliable and it's a lot of work. So the concept of a data spine is nothing new. It's what we call the concept of master data management, master database management, where you as the event organizer have one database to rule them all. So your database is the source of truth. Your database has what we call gold status, so that your data has gone from raw, unstructured or unorganized data to something that you've started to process, to something where you've actually put in place procedures and rules and criteria where you know that if data lives in this system, it's gone through the layer of rules that mean that you can 100% trust it. And that the attendee data will then live next to the exhibitor data, next to the session data, next to the speaker data, all in one place that enables you to do data analytics on that database. So it sounds really simple. It sounds like, why isn't everybody just making a database and then connecting up the data to it? Well, because it's not as simple as that. The issue is that, and the link to this will be in the description of the video or the posts where this lives. The issue is that even if you wanted to connect up, say, we're using an example here of lots of our friends in the event industry. I don't know if they think we're friends, but I think they're friends. So EventPack, for example, who manage all sorts of different things, lead scanning, registration, exhibitor management, and they have their way of storing the data, and they have their way of letting external systems access the data, and they have their way of retrieving the data. So if you use EventPack for your event, then you need to interface with their system the way that their system was built, which will not be the same as the way that the Grip system was built, and certainly not the HubSpot system. And there's nothing wrong with that. None of them are doing anything wrong. It's that each one of them has different ways of storing data. So you might have HubSpot, for example, who store first name, middle name, and last name as 3 fields. Just a really stupidly simple example. Whereas maybe EventPack have first names, plural, and then last name as 2 fields, because they would just combine together the first names into one field. Or maybe Grip just has a name field where you just put in the full name. And these are not real examples, but just for the sake of argument. So it means that you can't easily reference a user in HubSpot and say, oh, that's the same user as the one we have in EventPack. So the user we sold the stand to in HubSpot is the same user in EventPack who then scanned a bunch of leads and was really happy and went away from the event feeling like they got return on investment. So they paid £5,000 for the spot, and they seem to have got 20 leads, and each average lead for them is 5K. So they've made a really good return on investment. And that's something we can talk about in marketing, and that's something we can use, that the sales team can use then for rebooking next year. So imagine the HubSpot team coming back next year to that same exhibitor and saying, oh, I've got this really interesting data that's going to help me with the phone call I'm going to make with them to ask them if they want to come back, where I know that they actually scanned several leads and had a really good time last year. So that's super data for me to be able to do my job better. So that's just one really simple, silly example that is actually really important, but one of many, many, many examples of why this system should exist, why we should have some sort of layer here that is sucking in and piping out data to these different systems. So if we start imagining the integration, so if we say, okay, HubSpot and Eventpack, we need these two systems to talk for that example that I used. So let's say that we're going to declare Eventpack as the source of truth for the name, the email, and the company of the person who's joining. Why? Because HubSpot has maybe last year's data from Richard Osborne, who works for Visual Hive. And then next year I'm coming back, but I've actually registered for the event and I've registered under a different company name because maybe I'm doing consulting for another company, I'm on a mission or something like that. So it means that the HubSpot data is actually out of date, because if you think about it, the source of truth for this data, if we take Bogdan's great example of ontology, the ontological example here is that it's a person. So if it's a person and we're trying to decide who has authority over their name, it's the person who has authority over their name. The ultimate authority is with the person themselves. So where does the person actually touch the system? Well, here in Eventpack. They go into the Eventpack registration page, they register, they put their name in, their company, and their email. So at the moment that they've done that, that's the latest truth that we have about that person, because we can trust that that person is responsible for their own name and company and email. So that means then the HubSpot data drifts. The HubSpot data is now out of sync with the truth. So in this first kind of layer, we're sucking in data from HubSpot and Eventpack, and then maybe we're comparing it within here to see where there are differences, where there are drifts, and why. So we're taking the Eventpack information. There's then some sort of alert that says, oh, we've got a person here who their name was Richard Osborne in our system, in our spine, but now it's become Richard John Osborne because I actually do have a middle name. So if someone asked for whatever reason, it would go in. And HubSpot says it's Richard Osborne. So which one is true? And he's changed his company from Visual Hive to Clarion, for example. So what is true? And even at that point, you could argue if my email is the same, if it's richard@digitalbricks.io, which is my freelance address, then you have a point of truth between the two, and you can say, oh, we know that that's the same person because we have a unique identifier. We have their email that we can look at on both cases. But that could change too. It could last year it could have been richard@visualhive.co. Next year it could be richard@clarionevents.com. So if that happens, then what I have in this system is two Richards with no way to reconcile them, because it's two different names, two different companies, two different emails. So I've now got my event 2 years in a row where so let's say the Eventpack information goes in here, then it's going to go back and potentially go out to HubSpot to say the point of the spine is also to alert the other systems when data changes. So if there's a new user, we see that user has not yet been synced with HubSpot, then we need to move that user into HubSpot. And then you have two Richards in HubSpot, and the sales team are going to call me twice or email me twice, or email one Richard that doesn't have an email anymore. So the Visual Hive one is dead. So maybe they email richard@clarionevents.com, and they are treating me like I'm an entirely new person, because again, ontologically, from their perspective, this is a brand new person. There's no way of knowing that it's not. So they'll send me an email like, is this your first time? And I'll be like, well, of course not. I came here last year. Why do you guys not remember? So it's that, again, simple example that just highlights something very, very fundamental that's missing there, which is we need an identifier that can be attached to a user, and we need a system that doesn't just take in new data and say, oh, that's fine, we're just going to create a new person and HubSpot just has to suck it up. We want to create something where the data starts getting more trustworthy, and that's where it's moving from bronze, silver, and gold, these different standards of data. We want to get up to the point where there's no question that this data is the right data. And then we can integrate more systems, the more that we're sure about that. So going back to this example, the solution to this and how you can implement something to solve this with your kind of database system would be that if EventPack sends something to the spine automatically says that must be right because that is the source of truth. EventPack is the source of truth. But it will also have some sort of system that looks for duplicates, that tries to find duplicates, and that has a stop and check every time someone comes in from EventPack. So, okay, we've got a new person. Does this correspond to anyone else in our list? And it may just come out that, yeah, Richard John Osborne, that's quite similar. Could we compare them? And there's a way to figure out with your internal system that that's actually the same person. And so then he maintains the same internal ID, the same internal unique identifier. And that then gets compared to what's in HubSpot. And we say, okay, well, actually in HubSpot, it's Richard at Visual Hive, that's changed. So we need to change his email in HubSpot because the source of truth is EventPack. So even if someone in the sales team is changing something in HubSpot, maybe they've already tried to contact me and the email bounced back, and so they mark it as contact has been deleted or something like that. It's the spine who'll say, well, you're not the source of truth, HubSpot, so we're going to override what you've decided or what the sales team has decided. We're going to reactivate this person because now we know they have a new email. So it sounds like a pretty magical solution. The technology is not that complicated. It's just to be able to make the connector between each of these tools for data to be able to flow in and out of the tools, and then to put in place the system in your spine that establishes the rules about where each record has its source of truth, but moreover, where does each field have its source of truth. So I give you the example of a person from EventPack. If we go and have a look at the Data Explorer. So the person will have their, we said, so golden ID is like our internal ID. It's the one ID to rule them all. We know that Way Santos is the same Way Santos in every system because that's our central store for that data. So his full name, again, there's full name. So just another example of how sometimes data is stored differently. We know that is coming from EventPack. We know the email is coming from EventPack. The company is coming from EventPack, the job title, because Way Santos adds this data, and so he is therefore the source of truth. However, the lead score, that's not coming from EventPack. They don't score themselves as a lead through EventPack. So the source of truth for that is the sales team. So the sales team have analyzed Way Santos as a lead, and he's got a very high lead score because he's really interested in coming to the event. He wants to be engaging with exhibitors. He's looking to buy stuff. And so that data there the field has its source of truth in HubSpot. So HubSpot is the only one who will be allowed to update this data. Where we'll take in any updates if suddenly Way Santos says that he really was disappointed and he doesn't want to buy anything and he's really angry, then the lead score will go way down. And the golden record will update because HubSpot is the source of truth for that. Again, sessions, Way Santos is given a session. This data doesn't come from EventPack. It doesn't come from HubSpot. This data would have to come from, remember what we chose as the session manager, Lineup Ninja. So Lineup Ninja is the source of truth for the sessions field, but we don't have this field in this column until we've taken on the challenge of integrating Lineup Ninja with our central spine. So this is where this project is not just as simple as, oh, just take a database and put all the data in there. It has to be that each individual service and source of data has its own moment of, now we focus on Lineup Ninja. Let's understand deeply what their incoming and outgoing data looks like and how we can interface with that. So we'll create a seam, as we call it, to sew together Lineup Ninja and the spine. And that seam is really important because it's the placenta between the spine is gross. Sorry, it's not gross. It's fine. But the placenta, the transfer of information, of vital information between Lineup Ninja and our spine. And what passes through there is governed by rules. So we say Lineup Ninja is the one responsible for the number of sessions, but if Way Santos goes into Lineup Ninja, into his speaker profile, and changes his name to whatever, spells it with all capitals, it's going to go to the spine, and the spine will say no, because through the seam, you're not allowed to get names from Lineup Ninja. That's part of the rules. So your seam does not allow that transfer. Or it's a kind of question mark, in which case it goes into a holding place, into a kind of queue where somebody has to check it, or an AI has to check it, for example. And we assess whether that is a change that we should allow to pass through that layer, that seam, that placenta or whatever, into the spine or not, because he is there. It is him in Lineup Ninja, Way Santos, updating his own profile. But is it as much of an authoritative source as Eventpack? Probably not. So in this case, it would probably be going into a queue or something like that. So that's the connector that we build between the service and the spine. And then the big advantage of the connector is if you put in all this investment to make this system possible, and then one day you say, Lineup Ninja's run its course, we're going to switch over to LiveBuzz. I can't think of another session manager. And so the seam makes that easy because you've already built all the rules. You take LiveBuzz, I can't even remember if LiveBuzz does sessions. You take LiveBuzz and you look at the way that they organize their session data. It's going to be similar, maybe with different field titles. And all you're doing then is tweaking that layer between the two to let the new version of the data pass through. But the spine and the seam, that connection stays the same. So there's never any change between the data that goes from the seam to the spine. And the spine becomes golden because your connectors are protecting it from any kind of interference, any kind of bogus data. Through each of the connectors having these rules, each of the seams only letting pass through the data that's allowed to pass through based on the rules that you've set up. So that's how you end up getting to something like this, where you have this reasonably simple looking database. It could be Airtable or something like that, but there's never a question of whether this person's name is right, whether their email is right, because you know that the data has come from reliable source, and you would have the record in here of where it's come from as well. So that would be really important. What that means as well for your event is then if one day you say, oh, we really want to have, for example, Brevo. So let's say we want to do some email campaigns. We've never done that before with Brevo. We've always used, a manual service or HubSpot or something like that. Let's switch over and we'll use Brevo instead. Well, Brevo is going to need to grab the data from your spine. It's going to need to, you don't want to just be like exporting a CSV and importing it into Brevo. You would want Brevo to grab the data from the spine so that you know that it's 100% right, so that you know when Brevo sends an email to Way Santos, it says, Dear Mr. Santos, because it knows that is the correct name and not make a mistake. So when your data starts becoming golden, then you can connect any other service. You just have to wire up a new seam, a new connector between the service and the spine. Then you know that the data that comes out of this into Brevo is going to be perfect. And you know that Brevo can pull data from multiple sources. So it's not just the name and the email, but Brevo could potentially pull data from their interactions. So it could send them an email saying, we noticed that last year you did these things, and you can list out their interactions because that data can be pulled from the same source. We don't have to link up Brevo to HubSpot and then link up Brevo to Eventpack and have it pull the data from each one of those and manually create the connector to make it compatible with Brevo. You've removed this one-to-one relationship that doesn't work because it just ends up with duplicate data and bad synchronization. And you've installed this foundation layer that everything sits on top of. So Brevo doesn't even know that Eventpack exists. That's where you want to get to. Brevo doesn't know that Eventpack exists or care. Eventpack doesn't know that Brevo exists or care. But, for example, maybe Eventpack needs to know if the user is okay with receiving emails or not. So where does that data come from? The source of truth is Brevo, because when they receive our marketing emails, they're going to opt in or opt out, or they're going to click unsubscribe. So we're going to make a field in here that is email opt out, yes or no, true or false. And then Eventpack can grab that data from our spine. It doesn't know that it came from Brevo. It could have come from MailChimp. It could have come from HubSpot. doesn't care. It has the value, it can use it. So the spine becomes your source of truth for all the services that are built on top of it. And that's the dream. Whew. So then obviously the other thing you can do once you have that spine and all that data is then you can run analytics. So then you get to the kind of Snowflake, Databricks, ClickHouse, all that other stuff where you can look at your event with clever queries. So, top companies by lead score or whatever. Get the AI to generate the queries for you, as is the case with most of these tools today, and then have amazing analytics and statistics coming out and having a conversation with the AI to try to dig into this data and to cross the people data with the session data, with the interaction data, etc., and make all sorts of new insights that would never have been possible before if you had to pull the data from different places, or if you had to download the CSVs, upload them into Power BI, and then run data and then try to consolidate across, are we going to use the email field? Oh no, because sometimes the email is not correct in the other table. You don't need to worry about that anymore because you have these IDs that are reliable and really represent the person that you're analyzing. So that's where it kind of, all of this effort seems like a lot of effort for not very much reward until you think about being able to do analytics on all of the data that's happened in your event from all the different suppliers. So that's where it really launches it into space. But I think that's been a good introduction. How to put it into place is to get started with putting in a central database. Postgres is the perfect one. Postgres is a classic database, really good for big amounts of data. Put all your live data in there, and then start talking to AI if you need to, or developers or agencies, or consultants. But you could just sit at home and have a discussion with Claude tonight about it. You don't need to go straight to an agency. Explain what your event is like, explain all the different services that it has. Claude will probably go and do a web search and find the API documentation for each of the services and say, oh, well, this is actually not too difficult. Eventpack has a really nice API. Grip has an okay API. Or Leah has a really good API. Brevo has a fabulous API. So we're going to download all that documentation. We're going to make a project doc, and we can build a little prototype for you. We're just going to run Postgres on your home computer. You're going to get an API key from Eventpack and an API key from Brevo. And then we're just going to see if we can try to link up the data, see what differences there are, see what rules we need to create. And Claude can pretty much, if you just go for like 2 services, like use my HubSpot to Eventpack example, 2 API keys, and a little Claude project on your home computer, so it's reasonably safe, using Claude Code if you want, like I showed in another video. And then just do it. Just say I want to have HubSpot and Eventpack synced up. What data should be the source of truth? What field should be the source of truth in each system? Talk it through with Claude, and it'll pump you out a little proof of concept. And then you can test it out on last year's data from last year's event. See how well it works, see how well it can consolidate people who were actually duplicates in both systems. You might actually find some pretty interesting revelations about your sales data and your registration data from last year doing something like this. I think, geez, we actually missed a lot there. We actually had, 5,000 duplicates, my goodness. So worthwhile experiment just to get going, and also to start wrapping your head around this master data management, data spine concept. So and feel free to leave comments and to reach out if you want more information. I'm always happy to talk about it. It's a bit of a complex thing to wrap your head around, but I promise if you get started on something simple, just with a bit of Claude Chat to scope it out, must be with Claude Chat, not Claude Code. Move into Claude Code when you've scoped it out and you've got your scoping document from Claude Chat, give it to Claude Code and say, hey, Claude Code, installed locally on your desktop. I want to build a little example that we can run with this service and this service, please. So I hope that inspires you to do something and to test it out. And I look forward to seeing you in the next video.